Welcome back, everybody. The truth is, crime is about to explode all over the country, and I don't think that we're really prepared for it, but the government's getting ready for it. With the cutting of EBT and food assistance all over the country starting November 1st, even though we've had roughly 21 states that have stepped up and said that they're going to continue payments of EBT to make sure that the people have food, that of course leaves 29 states that have not done so. So what happens when tens of millions of Americans no longer have access to food? Chaos is what happens. Crime is what happens. And it's not just thievery at the store that we should be worried about. It's not just people shoplifting or walking out with carts filled with food not paid for. There's a ripple effect of desperation. And something I say is that once the door for criminality is opened up in a way that it's justified, then it's hard to close that door. A person will commit a crime out of necessity if it is a necessity. Even the most law-abiding citizen, when it comes to the point where their family is unable to eat, they're likely to do what they have to do in order to feed themselves or their family. I think one of the things that our society really has lost touch with is hunger. It's not something that we experience unless it's a diet. But the fact is, in many parts of the world right now, and throughout history, of course, including our country and European countries, hunger has always been a fixture of civilization. It's only been in recent times that we've produced enough food just in our country alone to feed the world 2 times over. But instead of focusing on the products that people actually need, we have focused on monoculture because it produces the most profit for farms, corporations, and the government. But still, there is enough food. I think it's pretty commonly known that 40% of all food that goes in the store eventually gets thrown out in the back. America is by and large the most wasteful country, and there's no reason for hunger to be a problem. But of course, when it comes to political expediency and pushing political dogma, well, it's just a consequence. But the fact is, crime will not just tick up. Crime will escalate to the point where the government will have to crack down. And there's a lot of people right now that are speculating that that's exactly why they put so many military members in cities all over the United States, to get people used to the fact that the troops are there. So when the inevitable civil unrest occurs, when the food riots occur, when hunger spreads throughout society and society begins to break down, the assets and resources are already put in place to quell any kind of rebellion. It does make sense, and you are seeing it. So let's go to one of the channel's favorite correspondents, who's not a correspondent, but he makes good points.
What's up, America? The United States readies reaction forces because of civil unrest from food stamps and top White House officials, military bases for protection. Yes, all that has happened just in the last 2 hours or so. The Pentagon says it's readying thousands of reaction forces in case civil unrest grips American cities in the next couple of days. On top of that, several White House senior staff have decided to go onto military bases for their own personal protection just in case. So that's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, the reaction forces, those are basically military police that are specialized. Now this started a while ago, but there's said to be 23,500 personnel across 50 states that could be activated. Now, Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio, and Kristi Noem have all taken housing at a military base. Kristi Noem, of course, before this incident occurred. So it looks like a lot of shit is starting to go down. I hope food stamps don't get taken away November 1st, because it looks like at least the government is starting to prepare for civil unrest. So that's what's happening with that.
So I was part of a quick reaction force when I was in the Marine Corps, and essentially, for those who don't know, it is a force that is always prepared to deploy at a moment's notice in case the need arises. And the fact that we're having these set up all over the United States, to me, tells me that the potential for some kind of conflict is escalating. But like I said, crime is about to explode in America. And it isn't simply because the SNAP and EBT zeitgeist. The conditions in which people in America are currently living under are crumbling. Our affordability when it comes to the necessities that we need in our life are constantly increasing to the point where, as we've seen in videos, people complaining about people who are on EBT People who aren't on EBT, who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, barely being able to afford the staples at the grocery store, this is a problem. Because in the government shutdown, we're seeing that inflation is going up. And as rate cuts continue to happen, there is a risk of inflation continuing to happen as the money printers start to turn on. What does that mean? That means that the unaffordability crisis, the cost of living crisis that we have in America, as the economy continues to crater, although corporations and elites in our country are making record profits, the point is coming, and it's coming quickly, where very serious decisions in the household are being made. And the choice is to either pay bills, pay rent, or to feed ourselves. And like I said, there are consequences to that, because in times of desperation and hunger being one of the most primal drivers of survival, people will do what they have to do. And like I said, it's not simply theft at a grocery store that you have to worry about. Most grocery stores have cameras. Home invasions are simple. Kidnappings are simple. Targeting people who clearly are more comfortable than you are is very simple. And that's what you're going to see more. You're going to see more face-to-face personal crimes being committed. Because individuals, citizens in the United States, whether you're armed or not, is a much softer target than, of course, a federal or government position is. I can be the first person to tell you that when you are approaching a government building, although you do not see the eyes are on you. And usually those eyes are behind the optics on the long gun. So when we think about this, we need to understand, well, why the quick reaction forces? Is that to supplement the police? Is that to make sure that they're able to crack down on crime more? No. The quick reaction forces are simply for food riots that might come, any kind of larger protest that escalate. That's why they're there. The personal, individual crimes on the citizens will fall on deaf ears. So at this point, people need to be much more prudent when it comes to the safety and security of their households and their personal protection. Of course, as a Second Amendment guy, I can say that, being armed is one of the most valuable things that you can do. Training is fantastic, but just a simple understanding of being very careful how you put yourself out there in the world is often a better way to protect yourself than actually being armed. We are in a show me culture where we want to flaunt our wealth if we have it. But those who flaunt their wealth in times of hardship, hunger, strife, and lack of resources are always going to be the first ones to be targeted. Because like I said, you're an individual, you're a soft target, you're an easy mark. And to a desperate person, you're an opportunity. This is why I say the consequences of this are far reaching, because you're talking about, even if half the states go ahead and create programs that allow these food benefits to continue, that means that half of them aren't. That means that of that 40 million, of that 42 million, there's 21 million people. We're just guesstimating here, that are going to find themselves tomorrow in a new condition of desperation that they perhaps have not experienced before. And it's that shock that changes human behavior, because slow, subtle changes are easy for society to really control and navigate people's behavioral adjustments. But when you throw 21 million people into a kind of shock of survival, they're going to do what they have to do. So like I said, personal theft is going to be big. Theft at the grocery stores, that's a given, but it's a lot more risky simply because there are more cameras, and it's one locality that is very easy to center security on. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see more armed military deployed inside of Walmarts, or at least having the police deployed inside there. Now, I don't live in the safest area. I'm a bit of a hood rat, always have been, and it's a little more rural, but I do live in one of the more dangerous places in the country. And it's actually quite common, if I do go to some of the rougher parts, that there are already multiple armed police officers or sheriff's deputies inside the Walmarts, inside the grocery stores. So it's normal to most people, but I can see that increasing as the need for it increases, as more people are driven to commit crime. Because in the end, we can always say that crime in itself is a personal choice, and that it's a choice of morality. It's a choice of conscience. But I'd say that's a very simple position to take for those who've never actually suffered any kind of desperate situation or conditions. There's this idea that everybody on Snap is just a bunch of hood rats like myself. Uh, you know, but that's not the case. If you've ever been to the line of a food bank, if you've ever actually seen and paid attention in the grocery stores to the people who are quietly whispering to the cashier, "I'd like to use my WIC card," because there is shame that surrounds it in our society. And people come in all shades and all conditions. They drive all sorts of cars because somebody who may have been doing well just a month ago may now be in a desperate situation. Now, as America has seen layoffs at this point happen by the millions and AI has taken over the job market, there's nothing for people to do. There's no jobs for people to take. There's no way for people to actually get more money. And the ability for people to actually save at this point is just, it's a dream. It's a delusion. It's something that you see on Instagram, quick hacks to early retirement. But that's a very exclusive membership for very few, very fortunate people. But most people in this time right now, the economic conditions that we have in America are facing a very bleak road ahead. And that's why the government has a quick response force. They don't care about personal crime because personal crime gives justification to increase the militarization of the police, to deputize the military to go into the communities even more. All of this is set up to create the conditions of martial law. I will put on the tinfoil hat for this conspiracy because it makes sense. And it seems like the only reason to be doing it at this point. Because you may be okay with American troops on the street. You may be okay with a battalion in each city. But it is something that is fundamentally anti-American. And the conservative position, which is the position that I used to come from, mostly said that, a dangerous liberty is more important than safety and security. And that's something that I do tend to agree with because I do believe that community responsibility and responsibility in the household and family often is much more impactful than a crackdown from the federal government. Full stop. But maybe I'm wrong on this one, but I don't think that I am. It's inevitable right now that we're going to see an increase in hunger and desperation in the United States. That is a fact that cannot be argued at this point. Right? Food just isn't going to materialize. There's going to be such a deep strain on food banks where they're going to essentially have to try to compensate for 10 times the number of people that they're used to. And even though private donations go a long way, they don't go as far as they need to go. So there are going to be people at the end of the line at the food banks who are just not going to have anything. And they'll be waiting there for hours. It's quite typical to see people wait at food banks for an hour and a half as it is because the lines are so long. What happens next week? What happens when that family that needs food doesn't get it? What would you do if you didn't have food? If you're already working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and there wasn't anything left? How far would you go to make sure that there is still food for your children? How far would you go? This is something that most Americans need to ask themselves right now as we continue to justify taking away the social safety nets from our country. This is what we need to ask ourselves now is the faith and trust in institutions that people used to rely on continues to crumble and crater. You may not agree with me. You may not agree with the social safety nets. But you have to agree that desperate people are dangerous people. And that when that desperation is created because of party politics, that the people, out of necessity, are completely within their rights to abandon the social contract and do what they need to do to provide for themselves and their family. Let me know what you think, ladies and gentlemen. If you're still here at this point, like and subscribe. Think about becoming a member. Donations, always welcome. It's a very interesting time that we're walking into this holiday season, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is it just going to be like every other holiday season? Are people just going to stack up debt? But what happens when you can only stack up so much debt? Those credit cards do get maxed out. Do you think that the quick reaction forces are something that's necessary and long overdue in our country? Do you think that it is for the benefit of the populace at large, or if it's simply to protect the institutions in this country? Let me know what you think. But it's Friday, everybody. So stay safe, stay aware, keep your head on a swivel, make smart choices, and don't flaunt. Be humble. This is a time to be very careful. But yeah, crime in America is about to explode. Thanks for stopping by.